Hi, my name is Mr. Novak. You might remember me from instructional videos including what's the difference between personification and anthropomorphism, or a diphthong is not an insult. Well, today I'm here to talk to you about the must, could, can't chart, a tool for instruction in writing. This is a video that's both for students and teachers. Students, you're going to learn how to create a must, could, can't chart. Teachers, you're going to learn why it supports your writing instruction. So let's start. So why do we have students create must, could, can't charts? Often students don't pay attention to really important aspects of the process of writing, namely the audience, the purpose, and situational factors. All writers need to consider those three things when they write. They need to consider the audience, who they're writing to. They need to consider the purpose of their writing, what they hope their writing achieves. And lastly, they need to also consider other situational factors that go into their writing. So let me just give you an example of how writers in real world situations create a must, could, can't chart in their heads without even thinking about it. Text messaging. Students, you know what it means when you put a period at the end of a short text that you're sending to one of your friends, right? What does that mean? So in this text message, we have two students discussing something. The first says, do you want to go to the movies today? The second student says, can't, period. I have a test to study for. No period at the end. The first student says, K, period. The second student replies, what's the big deal? I've observed this with my students in the past where I saw their text messages and I saw these periods at the end, and they told me what these periods mean. That period means either a student is mad or there's something serious that needs to be accentuated. Now, nobody taught students this rule about punctuation. This was something that they just learned from the situation. And when we think about text messaging, we realize that that's a particular type of situation that requires fast typing, right? Because your thumbs are sometimes all tangled up. So if we could express something like anger in a period, we're going to do that as writers. And it's a naturally occurring thing. It's just what we do as an animal when we text message. So how do we begin? First thing you do is you need to create a table, 5x4 boxes. And in that table, you're going to identify at the top, the audience, at the bottom, the purpose, and on the sides, I like to differentiate between situation and environment. And then in the middle boxes, you're going to have must, could, and can't. So the first thing students have to do is identify the audience. And not just any audience, the real audiences of this real piece of writing. Often it means identifying both the teacher as the audience, but in my classroom it very often includes involving other people as audiences, including other peers who might read their work, or even their parents or people in the community. So those get identified first. The next thing they must identify is the purpose. Why am I writing? So for example, in that text message, the audience was a friend, and the purpose was to convey an emotion about a situation, right? That period conveys an emotion, anger. The next thing I have students do is identify situation and environment. In this case, the situation is I'm typing on a cell phone. My thumbs are clunky. I need to be quick, and therefore I could do things like put a period to signify that I'm mad. So in a piece of writing, such as a letter, you're going to have different audiences. Maybe you're writing to a senator as your audience. For the purpose, you might have the purpose of asking the senator to take some kind of action or create a bill. And then your situation, well, that's going to be different than in cell phones. You're writing a letter. And you need to know the formats of letter writing so that way when the senator receives the letter, the senator knows, this is a letter from one of my constituents. So, after you've identified the audience, the purpose, the situation, and other environmental considerations, the next thing you're going to do is identify the musts of this writing, the coulds of this writing, and the can'ts. These are things that writers do. So you're going to ask students to think about what must you do as a writer, writing a letter, for example, to a senator. So one of the things students might write is you must spell correctly all your words, right? Because that audience is going to be reading this. You want to persuade them. They need to know that you are intelligent. So it's important as you list the musts, coulds, and can'ts that you start with a verb, because the verb is what the writer is going to do. And then these things that are listed in the must, could, can't chart must also be things that you can see in the writing as a reader. So when we look at that, we could say, aha, here's correct spelling. I can see that. And I understand why that's important. So I'd like to talk to the teachers right now. Teachers, this is important because it's based on genre theory. Genre theory says that writing is spurred by the environment in which a writer writes. And that environment is tied to audiences, purposes, and other situational factors. And that writers really are responding to situations. Situations that include past writing, situations that also include the audiences and the people around this type of writing. So it's really good for students to identify those things in their own writing and create assignments that have different types of audiences and purposes so that students can flex their muscles as writers. Go. Teachers, I also want to give you some other options that you can do with this must, could, can't chart activity. So one of the things you might want to do is you might want to make students make a must, could, can't chart as a class for one big writing. Because the idea there is that all writing is defined by community of writers. And when communities agree on types of writing, then you're getting closer to what actual authentic writing is like. So for example, in a journal, there are certain structures and formats that a publisher is looking for. The community all agrees on those things. So by creating a communal must, could, can't chart, students are going to better understand how their writing is tied to a specific community, specifically the community of your classroom. You can also ask students to create must, could, can't charts individually and then compare their chart with their classmates, seeing if they have identified the same must, coulds, and can'ts, the same audiences, the same purposes, without being explicitly told. Because that's what often happens in writing as well. You could also ask students to incorporate multimodal elements into this process. You could have students take a picture for an audience, or you could have students draw what the purpose might look like in a storyboard, or take a video that expresses notions of what purpose is. You could also have students hyperlink in the must, could, can'ts examples of where we've seen this in writing. For instance, I have a must, could, can't chart that my students made about the blogs that they were creating, and they did this. Ultimately, we as teachers want students to not only complete an assignment when they write, we want them to become writers. We want them to assume the identity of writers. I often think about this when my students ask the question, do I need a title? My reply is often a quote from Star Wars.
You must do what you feel is right, of course.
And that's really what writing's about, doing what you feel is right. And knowing what's right is dependent on a student's ability to understand who the audience is, what the purpose is, and what other situational environmental factors need to be considered as they write. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you find it useful. Keep writing. Thank you.